Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is Tower of London tea from Harney and Sons. It's another one I like very much when I'm in the mood for kind of a fruity black tea. And I thought it was fitting because I have read quite a few biographies of persons who spent some time, whether for good or bad, in the Tower of London or at the Tower of London. So that seemed to work for the Life Stories tag, which I am doing today. The original tag is from Book Time with Elvis. I will put the link down at some point down below, so you can see the original tag. If you've watched my channel long enough, of course, this past month I've done a lot of mystery reading, which I will do always, and I love it. And I do read a lot of fiction, but I do want to, it's kind of one of those reading goals that I have permanently, is to even out my fiction and my nonfiction reading. So if possible, I would love to 50-50 it, but I'm not going to be, I find that a lot of fiction books that I read are quicker reads. So not always, but often. And a lot of nonfiction take a little more time for me, just a little bit. So there's this part of me that wants to, even though I want to be, right in the middle somewhere, I know that it's not usually possible. So my main goal would be 60-40, so 60% fiction reading and 40% nonfiction. I think that's great. One of the types of nonfiction I've read, besides books about tea, for a very, very long time is biography. You can learn so much from learning about the life of people, about their time, about what they did. It's just such a great genre to me. And I encourage anyone to read biography. And, we're in that sort of gap between nonfiction Novembers. So it's kind of nice to talk a little bit about nonfiction in some way because, I still find plenty of channels that do so, but I just don't, it doesn't come up as much. So very happy to do this tag. So this is a tag about mainly biography. So let's start. Number 1, do you have a preference for biography or autobiography? In general, I like both, but I think I prefer biography because an autobiography, yeah, you're writing about your own life. You may leave certain things out. Maybe. Sometimes it's fun because you may actually get someone's story that you wanted to hear from their point of view, but often people will leave things out. Biographers put research into things, whatever. So do autobiographers, but anyway. Number 2, do you gravitate toward a specific, oh my goodness, I have lost English once again. Do you gravitate towards a specific area like sport, celebrity, history, etc.? Probably mostly historical biographies. Well, yes, and also biographies of writers, a lot. Sometimes artists too, but writers quite a lot. But sometimes writers were also experiencing history, so that works. Not too many sports, although I do think when I was a kid I read some kind of baseball biography of some sort. And celebrities occasionally. You'll see examples of this. There's certain types of celebrities that I have been drawn to over the years that I've read their biographies, which makes sense. Usually they are, already gone, usually dead, not always, but so you are reading about someone who lived in the past, which again is kind of historical no matter what. But yeah, those are what I gravitate toward. Number 3, have you ever read the life story of someone and in doing so it changed your opinion of them, for better or worse? And so some examples. Okay, so this is why I encourage reading not just one biography, if possible. Some people only have one biography. But if possible, a couple of biographies about a person, especially if there's anything controversial about them. I'm not talking about people who were just, known as pure evil or whatever, because even if they had something good about them, I don't want to hear too much about it. But I'm talking about just people who had things that they probably would have regretted people knowing about, or they did some things that weren't great. So I'll use an example. Speaking of celebrity biographies that I was into reading, so one of the musical groups that I got into as a teenager, because I was, I liked the music of my time as a teenager in the 90s. There was a lot of great music. but I was fascinated with the music of the 60s and 70s, and I became a really big Beatles fan for a while, and I still love the Beatles, but my favorite was, probably still is, John Lennon, because, I don't know, I think there was some slightly morbid thing about someone who had died already, might have factored into it, but I did like his music, and his life was pretty interesting, so I read a number of biographies about him, and most of them were pretty fair. I mean, there were some people who were a bit gushy, and some people who were, able to bring out, the warts and all experience. He wasn't necessarily 100% of a nice person. There were some things, some choices he made, and some things he said and did that I don't care for at all. But I don't think he was pure evil either. And there was a biography I came across called, I think it was called The Lives of John Lennon, and I didn't write it down. So I think the name was Goldman? Anyway, sorry about that. If I remember, I'll put it down below later on. Anyway, and yeah, so amongst all the biographies I was reading at the time, I picked that up, and it was, oh my goodness, it was so mean. And I was young. So for a little while there, I thought horrible, horrible thoughts about John Lennon. Like, he was just a terrible, perverse, nasty person, almost a murderer. Anything you could possibly think negatively about a person. Untalented, everything. And then, when I finished the book, I sort of came to myself and thought about the other things I read and said, okay, maybe I gotta be more balanced. I'm young, I didn't say this, but I was young, but I wasn't necessarily completely gullible. And I remember coming home one day, and I don't know how it's got into discussion, but my dad had a friend at the time who used to sometimes be there when I came home, this guy who read a lot, and somehow this book came up, and he mentioned that this author had died not too long ago, I think, on a plane, and he had been unclaimed for a while, and it sounds kind of sad. I don't like to think about that kind of situation if that happened to me or someone I loved. That I wouldn't want that, but he kind of told the story to basically indicate that this writer was just kind of not a very well liked person, and he was kind of known for writing those really, really mean biographies. So it did change my view on John Lennon for a while, but I sort of stepped back, and now I have, I think, a more balanced opinion of him. I don't look at him as someone in any way to idolize or even look up to, but I don't think that he was an altogether horrible person. So, also reading the biography of Effie Gray, it wasn't so much her that I had an opinion about, but her first husband, Ruskin, John Ruskin, who was brilliant in some ways, but in terms of marriage, I learned a lot of yikes about him. So I think I have enough of a decent opinion of him otherwise, but in that one respect, not so much. And I'm reading a biography on John Adams, which it wasn't that I had really a bad opinion of him so much, but I didn't really have much of an opinion at all. And I don't know how it will remain, but so far I'm not in love with him, but I do kind of like him. I liked his relationship with his wife, and I like some of his thoughts and attitudes and hardworking ways and stuff. So yeah, I at least it changed my opinion a little bit anyway. So such a nice tea. Number 4, must you always know who the person is before picking up their life story? It's funny because I thought about doing that one day, just picking up a biography with no jacket description or anything, and biography of this person, which could be a novel, because sometimes they'll like the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, but and just go into it completely clueless about what this person's life was about. But I've never done that. Even in the days before I could Google the person, usually I had a hint of who they were. But there were a couple of people that I didn't know that much about. So, for instance, I think her name was Mary Robinson, but the book was called Perdita. I got a copy of the book recently after having read it many years ago. I only knew very briefly who she was, and reading the book I learned a lot more about her, and I was like, wow, that's cool. And of course, Madame de Pompadour. I read her biography. I must have just found it in a library or something. Because I used to do that. I used to go to the library and just go to different sections, and something looked interesting. I would read it, the description, and take it out. And she was quite an interesting woman. Not just simply, okay, a royal mistress, which she was, but there was so much more to her. So that was one of the things that drew me to Doctor Who when they did an episode that featured her, because I was like, wow, I'm glad someone knows a little bit about her. So yeah, I recommend both of those. Both reading about both persons, by the way. Number 5, have you ever met someone whose biography / autobiography you've read? If we count memoir, and I know that memoir could be a little bit, I don't want to say exaggerated, but it's someone's memory, so it's not entirely factual, but it's as close as possible usually. So I would count Jenny Lawson, who has written at least 2 books about her life and some of the things that she deals with, and with a lot of humor. She's got a new book coming out really soon I think it's called Broken in the Best Possible Way, and I'm looking forward to that very much. But she also did a coloring book, like, those adult coloring books, and she was promoting it, signing whatever at Housing Works bookstore, I think it's called, cafe. Anyway, in the Village or near Soho, I'm not sure where, in Manhattan. And yeah, I like that bookshop. I think right now I might be still closed for browsing, but it is a pretty good used bookstore, and I think proceeds go to charity, which is always fun. Anyway, so she was there, and I got to go, and it was just the nature of the books that she writes tends to appeal to a lot of people with anxiety. So there were a lot of people there who suffered from some form of anxiety, and you could just feel it sitting there. It was funny because I felt like one of the least anxious people in the room, which is so rare. And so afterwards I met her and talked to her. I said something ridiculous, and even now I look back and say, why did I say that? But I think she probably understands. So yeah, so I met her briefly. I saw recently in my, I don't know, memories, Instagram memory things, a picture of me with her came up, so that's why I remembered it. So yeah, close enough, I guess. I might have met someone else, but it's not springing to mind right now. Number 6, what do you think about books that are described as semi-autobiographical? I mean, if it's a good book, it could be great. But there is some caution. I have read books over the years that are semi-autobiographical. I mean, I suppose Little House on the Prairie, all those books would count. I read those as a kid. They were based on Laura Ingalls Wilder. Yeah, I got that right? I didn't forget her name, did I? Based on her life and some of the people around her, but she did embellish a little bit or change some names, whatever. Specifically, the Nellie Olson character was supposedly a conglomeration of 2 different people. And in that, I would say a little caution needs to be offered, not specifically about her, because that's a long time ago, but there might be people in life who will use their writing as a weapon. Sometimes they are rightly upset about their treatment at someone's hands, and so I can understand that to a point. But some people will use something that happened to them or their life, and they will vilify certain people in their life under different names, but others may kind of ascertain who it is. And so I kind of think that in that way, caution has to be exercised, because sometimes you're only getting one side of the story, and you can say, yeah, it's fiction, so it's not all true. But I mean, even I'm reading still Sylvia Plath's biography, Red Comet, and years ago I read The Bell Jar, and it was good, but apparently there were some, things she wrote about some people in her life, based, people that the characters were based on, that were a little bit negative, that didn't have to be that negative, and I mean, that's okay if they can handle it, but it's, sometimes that can actually lead to people sending hate mail or hate messages nowadays, or some sort of cancellation of people based on what they read, and just be a little bit balanced there. Just be careful, because you're only getting one side of the story, but it can be quite entertaining. Number 7, give an example of a life story that really surprised you. Surprised, I don't know, but surprise, I guess. And I'm just going to go right to Romantic Outlaws by Charlotte Gordon. That was a book about Mary Shelley and her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women, among other things. And I knew that about her. So it's like a double biography, really. And it was, I already knew, because I had read a biography on Percy Shelley, a little bit about their lives, but this got a lot further. And it was surprising because I not only enjoyed both lives to read about so much, and still such a great book that I recommend to so many people, but also Mary Wollstonecraft, the people she knew in her life. Actually, same thing with Mary Shelley, the people that they came across in their life that I didn't know, just historical figures that popped into their lives. It was pretty amazing. So I guess that was the surprise. Number 8, what biographies, autobiographies, memoir, etc. are currently on your TBR? There's too many. There's too many to name right now. There's just too many. I had mentioned in a previous video or two that I am doing a thing called Poetry and Pre-Raphaelites, which is mainly to get back to reading about the Pre-Raphaelites, but also about those who have influenced them and those who they influenced, those they knew, etc. So I would like to read more poetry in general because I've been a little lax with that the past couple of years, but also I do intend to read a lot of biographies about different poets. I already am reading at least one, and there's just, I mean, you can't even see above me. There's just so many books right here that I have on my TBR that I can't just list all of them. So you'll see them in my future TBRs. Stay tuned. Also, I have a book about Perkin Warbeck. After having read again The Daughter of Time about Richard III, I kind of want to get into this book because it's related. And I have a biography on Richard III that I haven't read yet, and I just, I love, he's one of the characters who I always say read more than one biography about. He's a real person, but opinions are so divided about him, and so I would say read everything you can get a hold of about someone like Richard III, because you're going to get different points of view. Some people think that he was an absolute saint, and some people think he was a monster. I think he was somewhere in between. And I think he was definitely guilty of some things, but I also think that there were some things that possibly not so much. And so it's good to read from the people who think he wasn't so great and people who think that, let's give him an opportunity to defend himself somehow. I don't know. But either way, speaking of Tower of London, right? So that's why I say read multi-biographies if they exist. So yeah, that's just among some of the TBR. I can't. Biography is one of my favorite things to read, so my list is just endless. Plus there's other ones coming out probably. Number 9, whose life story did you find particularly hard going? Either emotionally difficult to read or very boring. So I wrote a few things here for different reasons. I read a biography about Joni Mitchell called Reckless Daughter by David Effie, I think his name was pronounced. And it was about her life. Some of it was okay. But first of all, I think it dragged a lot. And second of all, I ended up really feeling negative feelings about Joni Mitchell by reading this. And I'm not sure if that's what he intended, but I had read a book earlier called Girls Like Us by, I wrote her name and I can't read my own handwriting. Sheila Weller, I think. Anyway, and it was about Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon, and Carole King. That I thought was a little more balanced. And so maybe there are some people in life that don't need a full-length biography in order for me to appreciate them. But yeah, I didn't care for that biography one bit. Reckless Daughter. Born to be Posthumous by Mark Derry, I think it is. About Edward Gorey. More about him in a future video, by the way. Who, one thing that I did find interesting was I didn't realize that he wasn't English. He was British or something. There's something I associated him with British for some reason. He ended up being from Chicago. If you ever read, or if you ever watch an interview with him, it's like very, very Chicago. And so the life itself was pretty cool. I liked reading more about his later years when he was living in Cape Cod with his cats and his house and his art and stuff. But there were certain things about his choices Edward Gorey, the things that he would say about himself. Maybe he was hiding certain things, but this is what he said about his preferences, etc. And the author, if he would have explored in a couple paragraphs, this is why I feel like he may have actually been hiding certain things. And this is why, and covered it briefly and moved on, I would have said, okay. But he just kept going. Every time he talked about certain people that he knew, and some of the work that he did, some of the drawings he did, some of the writing he did, and it was like, I think this proves, you know what I mean? This I think means this and that, and I was like, okay, I don't know if you're really respecting what Edward Gorey really wanted, but anyway, so that kind of was upsetting to me, just because I just thought it was a little disrespectful to what this person said about himself, you know, and also, I don't know if this counts, but a biography on an animal. I mean, it is a life. So I shy away from sometimes. I have some books in my TBR that I really want to read that are about animals that I know usually it ends with a death. So it's hard. It's hard because you know it's coming. But I read Dewey the Library Cat, whatever it was called, and it was about a cat that lived in a library, and it was great, you know, because it was cute, whatever. But of course, the ending, I was so upset describing, you know, animals die, but I guess I was in the wrong place for it, so I was crying, and I'm not a big crier, so I don't know. So it kind of put me off reading animal books for a while, and then I read the Street Cat Bob stories, which at the time the cat was still alive, so it felt a little easier to read. The cat died, I think, last year, which was really sad, but yeah, it can be difficult to read books about animals, you know. Number 10, is there anyone you know personally who you feel should have their life story written down? I would say almost everyone, and I don't mean a full-length biography, but at least some life story of some kind. There's so many people in life that I talked to, you know, and then they died, and there's a lot of things I don't remember about them that I would love to have remembered, and that I have, like, a blurry thought, like my parents, like my grandparents, stuff like that, and I'll ask one of my sisters or relatives, were they this and that? And they're like, I think so. I'm not sure. And then it's like, I wish they would have written down their life or their stories or whatever, or I would have written it down or something at the time. So yeah, it's not like everybody has such an amazing life that they need a full-length biography, but I do think that almost everybody's life has something to remember. Number 11. It's not the last one. Number 11, have you read any diaries or collections of letters? If so, which ones did you find interesting? Yes, I've read a lot of collections of letters and diaries. I love both, and I'm currently reading some. One of the ones I liked, I usually read the abridged versions, but that's okay. The Diary of Samuel Pepys, which I will go back to again as soon as I can, was pretty amazing and fun. Weird sometimes, but okay. I liked collections of letters from Jane Austen, to other people, and because I love Jane Austen, and I learned a little bit about her just from the ones that survived. Virginia Woolf. I don't think I've read her diaries. I want to, but I have read a number of her letters, and that's just a few that I thought of, you know, off the bat. I would love to continue reading. I'm going to be reading Emily Dickinson letters soon, so something to look forward to. Last one. What are a few life story books you would recommend to us to read? So that was the one I just really didn't put an answer. I am going to just recommend them as they go along. I've mentioned a few right now that were really good, like Romantic Outlaws. But I think I'm really just going to, when I read them, or when I'm referring to one at some point, because otherwise I will be here. Oh, sorry. Otherwise I will be here for the rest of our lives, and that's not great. But yeah, I do so recommend reading biographies, if at all, if that appeals to you at all. If you like reading fiction stories, then it's just a story about someone's life. If a writer, if a biographer is a really good writer, he will make the biography like fiction, if that makes sense. Like just a great novel, I should say. So, so yes. That's all for now. The tag doesn't say to tag any other people. I would say if you're watching this and you like to read biographies at all, and you like doing tags, you are tagged. So that's all for now. This is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and biography filled day. Goodbye.